Johnny Carson was the undisputed king of late night, ruling the airwaves with his effortless charm, razor-sharp wit, and the kind of smooth delivery that made millions tune in night after night. But even kings have their breaking points, and Carson wasn't immune to irritation when certain guests strolled onto his famed Tonight Show couch. Tonight we're peeling back the velvet curtain to reveal the 10 guests who pushed Johnny Carson past his limits. You'll hear jaw-dropping backstage stories, tense moments you won't believe ever made it to air, and the surprising fallout that followed each incident. Stick around, because the guest who claims the #1 spot has a showdown so legendary it practically rewrote late-night history. Let's jump right into the countdown, starting with our number 10, Lola Falana. Lola Falana, Queen of Las Vegas, one night, unintentional lightning rod the next. At the peak of her career, Falana glittered under those legendary neon lights. She was a powerhouse song and dance sensation. Producers hailed her as the next big star, and audiences adored her. So when she graced Johnny's desk to chat about her scorching Vegas residency, fans assumed it would be an easy, upbeat segment. Instead, things went sideways fast. Falana arrived in high spirits, praising the Aladdin Hotel and its vibrant shows. But as soon as the cameras started rolling, she shifted topics. Eloquent and passionate, she began to speak openly about racial inequality she'd witnessed in showbiz discrimination that had nearly derailed her career more than once. For a host who mastered comedic diversion and riffed on light-hearted banter, this frank social commentary was uncharted territory. Johnny was blindsided. You could see it in his eyes, a flicker of discomfort. He attempted his trademark grin, launched a safe joke about Vegas weather, then tried to steer the conversation back to her performances. But Falana pressed on, recounting gritty backstage stories and calling out the systems that kept talented artists boxed in by prejudice. The Tonight Show audience sat stunned, shifting in their seats as the vibe went from sparkle to serious in seconds flat. Unbeknownst to Falana, she'd also wandered into another backstage battlefield, Johnny's long-standing feud with Wayne Newton over the Aladdin Hotel deal. Without even trying, Falana got caught in the crossfire, and her name became tangled in personal politics Johnny never aired publicly. Producers later admitted they feared the interview might alienate viewers who watched late night to unwind, not confront raw social issues. Falana's invitations to return mysteriously dried up after that episode, even though she continued dazzling crowds nightly in Sin City. This incident planted a seed for other guests. Johnny Carson valued charisma and humor above all, and he drew the line at deep-dive social debates. While he never officially banned Falana, he simply stopped calling. In an industry where an invite from Carson was the golden ticket to mainstream stardom, that silent exclusion spoke volumes. Here's the takeaway. Star power can open doors, but crossing unspoken boundaries on Johnny's turf carried real consequences. He ruled his show with a precise tone, light, witty, and entertaining, and as much as audiences craved authenticity, they tuned in for a break from heavy truths at the end of a long day. Lola Falana's brave honesty was admirable, but it clashed with the Tonight Show recipe, and the fallout became a cautionary tale for any guest bold enough to veer off the beaten path. As we move on to number 9, get ready for a completely different type of clash, one fueled by satire, impersonation, and a comedy confrontation that shocked everyone when it unfolded live on air. Now let's slide into number 9, a clash of comedic titans turned backstage showdown, Dana Carvey. When Saturday Night Live's rising star parlayed his impersonation magic onto Johnny's turf, it seemed like a perfect match, until Carvey decided to mock the host face-to-face. Here's how he crossed the line. At first glance, Dana Carvey seemed like a dream guest for Johnny Carson's Tonight Show. His rapid-fire impressions on Saturday Night Live had made him a household name in comedy. Producers expected him to deliver a flawless, fan-favorite segment filled with hilarious impersonations and boundary-pushing humor. Carson himself had teased Carvey affectionately in the monologue before the cameras rolled. Everything looked set for a smooth, laughter-packed visit. Then Carvey brought out his signature bit, the Carsenio sketch, a brutal parody of Carson's own persona. On Saturday Night Live, he lampooned the older late-night legend as desperate, outdated, and scrambling to appeal to younger viewers. The Tonight Show audience roared with laughter when Carvey revisited the act live on Carson's couch, directly in front of the host. Imagine sitting beside your idol and challenging their entire career style with comic exaggeration. Carson maintained composure at first, his smile tight and his eyes calculating. He tried to steer Carvey off the impression, nudging him toward lighter topics. But Carvey doubled down, imitating every nuance of Carson's timing, intonation, and even his wardrobe quirks. That was the fatal misstep. Carson, who thrived on maintaining respect and control, felt personally attacked. Behind the scenes, crew members reported a tense hush once the cameras cut, as producers scrambled to soothe Carson's bruised ego. The invitations that had once flowed freely to Carvey's agent suddenly ground to a halt. Requests to promote his upcoming Wayne's World film on The Tonight Show were quietly denied. Carvey's meteoric rise continued elsewhere, but the golden ticket to late-night prime exposure evaporated overnight. His impression had entertained millions, but in front of Johnny Carson's eyes it crossed an unspoken boundary. Carvey's career remained robust, but that unforgettable on-set moment altered his late-night passage forever. This saga teaches a clear lesson on Carson's stage. Unspoken rules ruled. He valued sharp wit, but demanded respect, preserving his late-night realm at all costs. Carvey's live parody proved that comedy can cut too close, and that in the theater of talk shows, even laughs carry weight. Pushing the envelope can win applause or close doors forever. With that high-stakes lesson burned in talk show history, buckle up for number 8. A face-off closer to home, behind the scenes. Johnny Carson's bond with his sidekick Ed McMahon was the stuff of television legend. On air they exuded effortless chemistry, McMahon's booming laugh seamlessly following Carson's punchlines. Viewers believed they were inseparable friends off-camera as well, but backstage reports tell a more complex story. Ed was gregarious, the life of every network party, charming producers, writers and VIPs alike. Johnny, by contrast, was famously reserved, protective of his privacy and wary of Hollywood's after-hours scene. They worked together nightly for decades, but their personal worlds rarely overlapped. Crew members recalled that once the cameras stopped rolling, McMahon would join festivities, cocktails in hand, while Carson headed straight for solitude. To McMahon, their professional partnership felt like a deep friendship. To Carson, it remained a powerful but strictly business relationship. That unspoken divide turned awkward when McMahon began to host occasional shows in Carson's absence. On one episode, he opened with an uncharacteristically bold joke aimed directly at Carson's notoriously private nature. The audience roared, but Carson watched the tape later with a pained frown. He felt publicly outed and exposed. Soon after, an exchange of offhand remarks about each other's hosting styles leaked into the press. Suddenly the morning tabloids splashed headlines about tension on the Tonight Show set. Behind the scenes, both men agreed to keep the peace, but the spark of their dynamic remained rooted in professional mastery, rather than genuine camaraderie. Ed continued to pop up in cameo spots, always delivering that signature laugh, while Carson maintained a polite but distant demeanor off-camera. Crossing invisible personal boundaries risked cracking the facade. Their silent tension became industry folklore. Ed McMahon's example underscores another Carson constant: maintain the illusion of warmth while guarding your personal space. Viewers will never glimpse private rifts, but insiders know the real rules. On The Tonight Show, loyalty meant respect, not friendship. Pushing familiarity could unsettle the delicate balance that made late-night magic. Remember, even a trusted partner must observe unwritten boundaries behind the cameras. Ready for our next showdown? Let's move on to number 7, where satire meets swagger and reputations collide. Now shifting into number 7, we meet the master impersonator whose art cut too close to home. Rich Little, known as the man of 1,000 voices, Little built his career on perfectly mimicking presidents, movie stars, and yes, Johnny Carson himself. Early on, this seemed like the ultimate compliment. Carson laughed along as Little slipped effortlessly into his iconic grind and grin routine, delivering Carson's own jokes with uncanny accuracy. That on-air chemistry made Little a frequent guest, and viewers applauded the clever homage. But behind the scenes, Carson was quietly tallying every Little Carson routine. To Johnny, Little's perfectly calibrated impressions felt less like tribute and more like identity theft. In private, Carson seethed. "I invented that voice," he reportedly muttered to staff. By 1982, producers and Little's agents began to notice a shift. Invitations dwindled without explanation. In Little's autobiography, he claimed Carson banned him outright. NBC insiders chalked it up to audience fatigue, calling Little's act repetitive. The conflicting narratives only deepened the mystery. The tipping point came when HBO cast Rich Little to play Johnny Carson in The Late Shift, a dramatization of the brutal battle over Carson's successor. Picture the irony. The man who had impersonated Carson so many times was now literally stepping into his shoes on a rival network's movie. Word back at NBC was that Carson got the last laugh. While he silently fumed, ratings for The Late Shift soared, proving that Little's comedy could thrive, just not on The Tonight Show stage. The fallout: Little's golden ticket to late-night limelight vanished, replaced by the bittersweet validation that his craft could stand on its own away from Carson's glare. Moving down the list to number 6, we land in Sin City, where a friendship turned bitter feud over real estate deals. Enter Wayne Newton, America's midnight idol, the desert-born singer who lit up the Aladdin Hotel's showroom night after night. Early on, Newton and Carson hit it off, united by shared ties to Vegas glitz and glamorous lifestyles. Newton made some 30 appearances on The Tonight Show, each one bolstering his star power. Carson endorsed the Sin City shine. Then came the business blow. In 1980, both men vied to buy the Aladdin Hotel. Newton outbid Carson, snagging the deal that amounted to both a trophy and a lucrative empire. Overnight, their dynamic flipped. Money talk crept into late-night banter, and what had been playful jabs morphed into pointed monologues. Carson's jokes about Newton's wardrobe and setlist grew meaner, hinting at organized crime ties in whispered barbs that cut deeper than any punchline. Newton wasn't laughing. He confronted Carson off-camera with a stern warning: "Back off, or there'll be trouble." Carson relented, but the frost remained. Wayne Newton never stepped onto Carson's carpet again. In its place emerged a cautionary underscore: mixing friendship with financial competition can leave the strongest bonds teetering on the brink. For aspiring guests, Newton's story was a powerful signal: cross Carson in business, and your Tonight Show days are numbered. Our countdown continues at number 5, with an infamous train wreck from across the pond: Oliver Reed. The larger-than-life British actor was notorious for wild antics, and when he landed on Carson's couch, viewers expected fireworks. What they got was an uncomfortable spectacle that tested every ounce of Carson's hosting finesse. From the get-go, Reed's swagger clashed with Johnny's polished cool. Midway through the segment, actress Shelley Winters, sitting in as a second guest, playfully dumped her whiskey over Reed's head. Instead of laughter, it unleashed a ripple of awkward tension. Reed, stubborn and unapologetic, tried quips about his drenching but misread the room. Carson, normally the maestro of improvisation, visibly recoiled. His signature grin tightened into a courtesy smile that never reached his eyes. As the interview dragged on, Carson attempted to recapture control, interjecting his own opinions in a flat, clipped tone, an unusual departure from his smooth delivery. Every punchline felt forced, every segue stumbled. Behind the scenes, producers described a hush, overtaking the control room as if everyone collectively held their breath, waiting for Carson to call cut. When the cameras finally blinked off, Johnny reportedly griped about surviving an interrogation rather than hosting a show. Reed's disregard for the unspoken rules, like reading the host's mood and respecting the flow, resulted in a distant handshake and no second invite. For a man who thrived on high-energy showdowns, this flopped under the burden of awkwardness. His segment became a cautionary clip that producers still reference when onboarding guests: never mistake bravado for chemistry, and always respect the host's rhythm. 3 down, 7 to go. Each of these stories shares a central thread. Johnny Carson valued the alchemy of ease and wit over clashing personalities or unpredictable detours. When guests upended that delicate cocktail, whether through imitation, real estate rivalry, or sheer awkwardness, the fallout was swift and silent, a cancellation louder than any public apology. Charlie Callis was the comedian's comedian, famous for face-cracking expressions, wild characters, and those unbelievable sound effects that seemed impossible for any human mouth to produce. When he first strutted onto Johnny's stage, the crowd went wild. Carson, ever the consummate professional, beamed at Callis's live demos of sirens, crashes, and cartoonish squeals. For years it seemed like a perfect pairing. Callis would burst into chaotic bits, the audience would roar, and Carson would expertly bounce back with a quip that turned each explosion of noise into pure gold. That is, until one fateful night in 1982 when the routine fell flat like a soufflé in a wind tunnel. Callis launched his signature routine with high energy, but the laughs didn't come. He fumbled a gag here, stumbled over a punchline there, and the room filled with that dreaded silence only a live audience can provide. Experienced hosts can salvage a flopping bit, and Carson had done it 1,000 times once. He winked at the camera and teased, "Well, if that joke bombed, maybe I should try it." The audience chuckled. But on that night, something snapped. Rather than steer Callis back gracefully, Carson let the bomb land. He leaned forward, made a swift whistle, like a cartoon bomb dropping, and the studio echoed with the sound of comedic defeat. Callis, ever the showman, tried to brush it off. He marched across the stage to make it a shared joke, and that was his mistake. In a playful gesture meant to say, "We're buddies," he shoved Carson on the shoulder. On TV they were pals, off camera though, boundaries were far more rigid. The studio froze. Viewers at home may have chuckled nervously, but back in the control room, producers and camera operators exchanged panicked glances. Carson's face paled beneath the stage lights, and his voice, usually so unflappable, was icy when he said, "You'll never be on this show again." The camera lingered on Callis's stunned expression as he attempted a feeble apology. That moment became legend. One ill-timed shove, and decades of goodwill evaporated in a single heartbeat. Charlie Callis's career survived, thanks in part to his friendship with Mel Brooks and a thriving underground comedy scene. But the Tonight Show door slammed shut, and he never set foot on that red carpet again. The lesson. In Carson's world, camaraderie was only as real as the scripts and cues allowed. Cross the line even in jest, and you risk vanishing without a trace in the late-night universe. Next up at number 3, we tackle a feud that tore apart one of Carson's closest allies, Joan Rivers. Their story began like a dream. Rivers was a frequent guest, a sharp-tongued comedian whose wit made her a fan favorite. Carson saw in her a notorious game-changer, bold, fast-paced, fearless. He invited her to guest host, letting her sit in his chair when he took nights off, a move almost unheard of in late-night circles. For years, Rivers and Carson seemed inseparable on camera. Rivers credited Carson with launching her into talk show royalty, and she peppered her stand-up with gratitude for his mentorship. Then 1986 arrived, carrying the seismic news that Joan Rivers had inked a deal with Fox to launch her own late-night show directly against Carson's Tonight Show reign. Rivers saw it as her moment to shine on a solo platform. Carson saw it as a betrayal. Worse, Rivers didn't give him a heads up. Carson, a man who prized loyalty in private as much as he did charm on screen, felt blindsided. The grapevine, not Rivers' phone call, brought him the news. Industry whispers painted a portrait of Carson stewing in silence, his trust eroded by one simple misstep. In true Carson fashion, he didn't mount a public rant. Instead, he quietly wielded his power. Guests who dared appear on Rivers' new show learned they'd be blacklisted from The Tonight Show. Talk show hopefuls scrambled to choose sides, and Rivers found herself fighting for guests she'd once invited effortlessly. Within a year, Fox pulled the plug on her program, citing low ratings and limited star power. Rivers' show faded away, and though she remained a beloved comedy figure, her late-night ambitions never recovered. Carson never took her back. He stayed silent on air regarding Rivers' disappearance, letting the unspoken verdict speak for itself. Joan Rivers' saga illustrates Carson's unyielding grip on late-night loyalty. He rewarded trust with opportunity, but punished perceived disloyalty with professional exile. On The Tonight Show, relationships were built on mutual respect, and no amount of on-camera warmth could survive a backstage betrayal. Now at number 2, we confront one of television's earliest giants, Bob Hope. Before Johnny Carson ever slipped into that signature suit and ignited America's living rooms, Hope was the undisputed king of late-night laughter, a legend who entertained troops overseas and headlined Hollywood's biggest galas. Carson grew up idolizing Hope's rapid-fire one-liners and his seemingly endless stash of topical quips. But when the younger comic finally claimed his own throne at NBC, admiration morphed into exasperation as their styles clashed behind the scenes. Bob Hope's approach to comedy was built on a fortress of written material. He leaned on a tight team of writers who crafted every joke, every pun, and every self-deprecating zinger long before he stepped onto the stage. Carson, by contrast, thrived on spontaneity, riffing on audience reactions, improvising segues, and finding humor in the unscripted moment. To him, Hope's dependence on prepared scripts felt like wearing a suit of armor to a fencing match, safe, immovable, and lacking the thrill of genuine give and take. Their first face-off on The Tonight Show began innocently enough. Hope dropped by to promote an upcoming NBC special, armed with a stack of index cards. Carson greeted him with a warm grin, eager to link arms with his comedic idol. But as soon as they started, it became clear that the energy wasn't clicking. Carson would volley a spontaneous joke about Hollywood gossip, only to watch Hope flip through his notes, search desperately for the next written line, then deadpan deliver a punchline that, while polished, felt disconnected from the moment. The audience shifted uncomfortably, caught between the master of monologue and the master of manuscript.